Where?
There's just going to be more of it.
It's inexorable. Yeah. There's just going to be more.
We've always been partners with nature, but one thing, nature doesn't populate. The world is the same size, but we keep growing like a virus.
The Matrix.
And we just keep taking and taking and taking.
And theoretically, at some point, we've got some of the population biologists out there will say, you know what, nature's letting us do that because theoretically, we'll get to the point where we'll destroy ourselves.
Right. Yeah.
This took a
I
turn.
totally agree with that.
I love it.
Well, we can really go down to the rabbit hole if we want to.
That's my specialty.
Yeah, but that can get into faith issues too, because the faith issue says that men are stewards. If you believe the basics of that belief system, that we're stewards of nature and supposed to have a balance, to be a steward over nature, and if we did it in balance, it would be what it is. But since there's evil and people choose evil, you have that potential of genociding each other out. If you allow that to be what it is, it's full evil.
That's an interesting discussion, just the whole topic of verbiage and whatnot. Not, again, to go way out of the discussion, but you mentioned the word stewardship.
Yeah.
In the early versions of the Christian Bible, they used the word, begins with a D, what was it? Dominion. We had dominion, humans, man had dominion over the landscapes. And there have been some language researchers out there that have actually tracked the evolution of that word dominion, and when it was written, dominion meant stewardship. It has just devolved, I guess you could say, over time to mean we are masters over something now.
Ironically, we have an Old Dominion Fields project.
Well, there you
There
go.
you go.
Yeah, and the other side to that, being Native American, you get that switch too, where a lot of it talks about, in stewardship, that's how I interpret it, but the Native American used fire to take out stuff to be able to make it healthier and whatnot. But that mindset also was always organic. They lived in tents, they were nomadic, they moved around all the time, as opposed to the culture that has houses and must have things, more things, and more things. So I'm just talking about two different mindsets of a people group and culture.
So you guys are bringing about, really what you're talking about is the morals and the ethics that are associated with why we do fuels and why we might value one thing over another. And obviously the default for an American public or a public that doesn't want to look too deeply into this is, we default to the human values as always number one. And so the conflict is when there's people, like say the Sierra Club or some of these other interests, but don't always want to put humans as number one. Not that they want to take them out of the picture, like what I was alluding to, but they want there to be an emphasis on, hey, let's actually think about the landscape and let's think about and let's value these things. And it does become sort of a moral and ethical issue. For what it's worth, and I think most of us would agree, is there's probably some sort of middle ground where we can coexist. And but sometimes what I see, and the more I do this, the more I see is sometimes you really do have to sort of choose a winner in the equation. And I wouldn't mind feedback on this, but sometimes you can't have everything. For instance, I've been talking about like these fuel breaks. Like at some point, you have to just choose what you're going to do on a piece of land. Maybe you want to manage it for a particular wildlife species. Maybe you want to manage it for some habitat. Maybe you want to manage it for a fire protection feature.
Personally, I agree with that. I mean, we live in this unicorns and rainbows type mentality of, we want it all so we can have it all. But like you said, a fuel break and ecological restoration are mutually exclusive topics. I mean, as a botanist, you would think, oh my God, she probably hates fuel break. Not really. I mean, they're serving a purpose that humans have, we've identified an overarching goal that we feel is the most important thing there. Yeah, it's true. There's been a lot of world ecology it's easy for first world folks to look down in third world countries and say, oh gosh, how can they be so disrespectful of nature and go about clear cuts and slash and burns and whatnot. But when you look at the situations that they're living in, to them the most important thing is, gee, where will I get my clean water? Gee, am I going to get dysentery today?
Yeah.
Gee, is there food enough for me to survive one more day? And so they're not thinking about the long term, and then you have a whole suite of issues. So when you look at ecological management in third world countries, it actually starts with social order and getting those people the basic life necessities. If they don't have that, they're just not going to care. So in a way, we kind of live in a society that's so privileged. Not in a way.
In a way.
Yeah, we do.
Some people do. We certainly have some social issues in our own country as well, but not to the extent that like Rwanda does.
So, to establish my hippie creds a little bit, I did hear something on NPR just a few days ago that was perfectly salient to that, which is that they were talking about Brazil. And Brazil's the rainforest. I don't know if you've heard of this before, but they call it the lungs of the world. You guys ever heard of that? So they were talking about. So in Brazil, there's this fight where they have where, like what Lisa said, where they're slashing that, they're turning it into agriculture. It's a lot where like they always talked about, like it's where a lot of your beef was grown for McDonald's hamburgers. They're cutting down the rainforest and creating pasture land. Well, obviously us in our third world, and they may be a second world country, although they might argue. But anyway, we're like, oh, we don't want you to cut down the rainforest because we want to breathe. And so the Brazil's president just said a few days ago, well, if you want to breathe, you're going to have to pay us to breathe, is what he said. In other words, hey, we need to make a living down here too. So it's an interesting thing for them to say. So the Brazil's president was like, you don't want us to cut down these trees anymore, then give us some money, infuse it.
There's give and take all over. I mean, when you look at the logging that's been done in the U.S., the rates have dropped precipitously. Where are we getting our wood? It's from Canada. So globally, the rate of deforestation is not necessarily going down. I mean, in some places it's going down, in some it's going up. And again, it's just.
And how does this factor into fire and fuels management in America? The Western?
I heard we were giving some bug trees to China. Did you hear that?
We're giving bug trees?
I certainly hope so. They've given us
Selling
enough
it.
bug trees.
Selling it.
And maybe.
We buy it for a bigger cost.
I haven't heard that. That's interesting. That wouldn't surprise me. What I was going to say is that we're having a lot of these fires, right, which are burning high intensity. So every year, it seems like now, like the last few years, we've had like 100,000 acre high intensity rip out of the Sierras. I personally, that makes me afraid. I've seen the maps where you look at the whole Sierras, and like there's giant holes out of it just in the last 10 years. You got your rim fires, your king fires, and there's mixed severity across this and everything. But that's going to affect things eventually, probably. I would think anyway. Disagree? Agree? Disagree?
Well, what are they doing about the bug kill on Sequoia?
But they're not doing anything about the bug kill. It's really
So
nothing.
isn't it already taken itself out because it can't compete tree-wise? Like a burn. And why shouldn't we burn if it's going to do that anyway?
Well, maybe the lesser of two evils would be trying to hope for the best. No, I'm serious, Well, we could go and like burn it, nuke it, and cut everything, or we can hope that maybe it'll equalize. Maybe nature will choose us for
The bug trees will choose, the bugs off the trees will choose selectively.
There's nothing we can do. I mean, the fact of the matter is with bugs, there's nothing you can do about bugs. You can do some things about bugs in some small campground areas where you spray, but bugs are going to do what bugs are going to do.
But isn't that fuel loading?
Yeah, yes and no.
It depends on how strong of an influence it is. I know with the pine beetle out in
Yeah.
Colorado, it was all
Where you have
it
whole
was an
stands.
elevational gradient.
Yeah.
Is what we saw. I mean, in Jefferson County, we were like 4,500 to some 9,000 feet, but then you have Boulder County that's directly north of them, and they get up into 10, 11,000 feet, and they had significantly more kill, and it had to do with a lot of the climate changes that they're seeing. So the winter's not lasting as long, and things warming up. When the winters would come, they wouldn't get into that deep freeze, so it wouldn't kill off the components living under the bark and whatnot.
To answer your question about fire hazard, with bug kills, there's actually some research that it's a curve. It's kind of an upward and descending curve, a bell curve. And we had the same issue in Idaho that they had in Colorado, like 10 years ago, and then a little bit more recent than that. In our lodgepole pine, we had what we call the red trees. They had the red trees in Colorado too. So you go from it's just a stand lodgepole pine, green, whatever, and then they start dying, and then it all turns red, and then it's extremely flammable because it has all that red slash. But then after 3-4 years, all that red needles fall off the ground, and then you just have standing dead. And it's actually not as much of a fire hazard there because, especially while it's standing, it's hard for that to catch on fire, I guess, because there's no fine fuel up in the crowns or anything. But then once they start falling on the ground, that's the point where they're at now in some areas where you're getting that surface loading, which, again, heavy. So one thing I want to stress is heavy dead and down fuels are, in my opinion, not really a fuels issue in most cases because, it's hard to get that to light. There's only a problem, it kind of sounds silly, but once it actually does catch on fire, like in a fire, it can be a problem. But it just sitting on the side of the road is not necessarily an issue. It's really the finer fuels that we really try to manage in fuels projects, although even that, there's some differences now. So it kind of depends on where that's at with the needles and all that sort of thing. And if there's, like you were saying, if there's like 5 dead trees per acre, that's one thing. But if there's 100 dead trees per acre, that's a lot different thing. Right now, what's going on is there's 20 million dead trees across California, but they're spread out across the entire Sierra Front. I think it's going to cause some issues, but I don't think it's necessarily we need to do anything about it necessarily. I think that's the general consensus from what I've been hearing. Because even on the Cleveland, we've been getting a few more dead trees on the lagunas, but just going after those dead trees is going to be a pain in the ass because it's like 6 or 7 per acre, and so we're going to have to walk all the way over to that one, and then walk all the way over to that one, and then we're going to have 6 or 7 piles per acre to burn. So it just becomes a pain in the butt. You know what I mean? So it's just logistically hard to implement a fuels reduction treatment. So but it's really until you get hundreds of trees per acre dead that you have to do something about it. But even then, you can't contain bugs. Agree?
Yeah, and bugs are a different challenge too. I mean, there's enough of an argument with the native ones, so like Sturge Spudworm and pine beetle and whatnot. They're naturally in the system, and the only reason why we see these epidemic levels now is because of past logging efforts and the resulting high basal areas.
Well, and fire suppression because you have overstock.
And fire suppression, and then there's still the argument of climate change, and plus the adaptation of the bugs themselves. I mean, we started seeing in Colorado pine beetle going through 2 generations a year, which had not been recorded anywhere else yet. So they're starting to adapt as well.
The Jurassic Park theory.
That's right.
Nature finds a way.
That's right.
That's right. That's true.
Solarization worked great on those summers,
So does incineration. All right, this is a great conversation. I appreciate you bringing that question up. But now we want to talk about policy. So I wanted to ask a question about the lights. I turned those lights off. I can't remember if they were off this morning. I don't think so. Do you guys want any? Because we can have these lights. Normally I do. Are you guys having a hard time seeing the screen or anything? I don't mind turning it down a little bit. There's some feedback here.
I'm good.
You guys are all right? All right. Well, then let's do
You're blocking
that.
my view anyway, so it's
What's
great.
What?
So you're blocking my view anyway.
No, I'm
doesn't
sorry.
matter.
Here, let me
Oh,
just lecture.
Jogo, what?
I'm just going to lecture.
Chief versus chief.
Chief on chief action. Oh wait, no, that doesn't
Hey, I'm recording. Good job.
You're late. You're late. I bought some pretty bitchin' editing software. Real quick, I want to talk about WUI. So this is always an interesting one. What is a WUI? You guys know what WUI is? Wildland Urban Interface, right? So what is it though? How do you define what it is? I've looked for this. And this is actually one of the more interesting things. If you actually go try to find a definition of wildland urban interface, trying to find it. There are some definitions. HEFRA, which is the Healthy Forest Restoration Act, which we're going to talk about later. NFP, which is the National Fire Plan. There are some definitions in that. But there is no absolute definition of WUI. I've gone and looked for it. It doesn't exist. It's everybody's sort of interpretation of it. And the way I like to think about it is, it's one of those things, you know it when you see it, but you can't define what it is exactly. So how would you guys define WUI? What is it in your mind?
Communities and people that live close to the wildland.
People. Okay, that sounds good. Is that the definition?
That's a
find one of them.
Or is that Ray's
Probably,
definition?
I think
So-
Go ahead, sorry.
It's something that I just learned
Yeah.
doing structure protection, going to fires, and then when you come out with the urban interface.
So what do you say? People living close to the
I just wrote it down.
right? Yeah, I see what
Community or people that live close to a wildland.
community of people. Okay, or in
Directly affected by it.
directly affected by.
I think it's the juxtaposition of photogenic and natural landscapes.
That's nice, dude. Yeah. People. I mean, it's always like I think the only thing we can really sort of agree on. I mean, we can agree on other things, but you have people, and you have something that's going to catch on fire, right? Or people and their interests, and how that mixes. But there's different types of WUI too. My only point with the slide is that there is no sort of standing definition, no go-to definition. There's a bunch of different definitions. I just find that interesting. Is that there's really no sort of go-to. And I think it's because there's a lot of different types of WUI, and there's a lot of different types, or different juxtapositions, to use that word.
Sorry to mention real quick.
Yeah, please.
Woolies everything anymore. I mean, you could have a fire in Yosemite that's been burning for 3 days, 4 days, 4 months. Eventually, someone in Reno is going to complain, and we're going to go in and put it out.
Right.
It's not direct urban interface, but that smoke is affecting somebody somewhere.
That is, yeah, like
You know, or even in
tens
the
or
Gila,
hundreds of miles away.
You know, the Gila, fires get big enough, smoke starts settling into places where people are, it's going to bother somebody with asthma.
Yeah.
We're going to go in and get it. So to define WUI as a boundary, just put a line around the United States.
Well, that begs the question. Do you guys know what percentage of the Cleveland National Forest is defined as WUI in our land management plan? Percentage?
75.
75?
Let's go 75.
Oh,
75? Any other takers? Let's do a Price is Right here.
52.
52?
27.
27?
95 over there.
95? That's a lot closer.
Over 80.
100%.
100%.
101.
Actually, I think it's like 98.
All fires have to be put out. Something to do with it.
It's all defined as WUI. We have what WUI defense, which is immediately adjacent to structures within 300 feet or whatever. There's WUI threat, which is, I can't even remember, there's varying boundaries out to 1.5 miles. And then everything else is, we call it WUI environment, which I've never even heard before until I came here, but it's the WUI environment. And that goes exactly what Jose was saying, which is that even if it's in the geographic middle of the Cleveland, if it lights on fire and starts drifting smoke or starts seeing flames, someone's probably going to see it. Someone's going to be affected by it. There's probably going to be an asthmatic or somebody down the street. You know what I mean? So we call it the WUI environment. And that actually is not the same in all of the Southern California forests, but I believe most of the Berdue and I think probably all of Angeles is pretty much that same way because we share a land management plan. But anyway, yeah, the Cleveland is all defined as WUI because it's exactly what you're saying. So there's WUI interface, there's WUI intermix. These are some of the terms that you hear. Anybody have any idea what the difference between interface and intermix might be?
Interface would be a solid line, and intermix would be
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah, that's the way a lot of people look at it.
frontal salt, lower salt.
Frontal salt, rear salt. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's exactly what you just said. Mostly interface is like that classic line where you have a community and the fire's threatening it and whatever, the fire's coming towards it, and intermix with just a bunch of houses. I don't even know why I just said that because you just said that. Perfect. Cool. All right, all we do, so in fuels management, all we do is defined as either WUI or non-WUI. Where do you think most of the funding and emphasis, at least congressionally and higher, is? Yeah, WUI, but where's the fun stuff? Not in the WUI. What we do? I don't know. I guess whatever. I'm being a little cheeky with that, but this non-WUI, this is that whole like ecosystem restoration stuff for the most part. Maybe some landscape field breaks and stuff here, but there was actually, I had heard at one point, like 10 years ago or so, that Congress was actually thinking about only funding WUI projects. They weren't even going to fund non-WUI projects, which was back on the Sawtooth at that point. I had hardly any WUI there, and all the WUI we did have, we had protected it because it was like, it was like 5 houses or something. We cut a line around it one day and we were done. all the rest of it was like this Junicide and the aspen stuff. I personally thought that was very valuable work that we were doing, and it had a fuels management benefit, but it didn't define WUI. So the damn Californians with their WUI, that's what I thought back then, and now I'm here. All right, so threat zone, defense zone, environment, we talked about that already. And then, and like I was just saying, there are funding priorities sometimes that depend if it's WUI or not. Like for instance, a lot of these, I mean, for instance, those non-fed lands monies I talked about, you know, most of that wants to go towards WUI projects, and that's an aspect of that funding process is to decide whether it's in the WUI. So I just want to throw these slides out there that WUI can be kind of hard to define at times, but it's something we're going to deal with constantly. Okay, so enough about, we need to come up with that. So this is awesome because we've already talked about all this so far. You guys are already getting ahead, I love it. But I'm going to throw it out here anyway. This is just an evolution of fuels in the U.S., which is, what I mean is really fuels and fire management. So we'll just go through the top. So the pre-human settlement, so before humans, right? Conceivably, you had free-ranging fires. If a volcano erupted and lit a fire, or a lightning strike came out there, we weren't there to see it, but we can only assume that the fire burned and did what the fire wanted to do. Of course, we hold this at the highest pinnacle of achievement in nature, right? Like this is more or less what we're trying to get to, right? For restoration, don't you think? Most people kind of hold that up. Would you guys agree that when we think of restoration, we try to think of it, oh, totally hands off? But when was that? I mean, that was so long ago that we can't even begin to think about it. As soon as, so then you started getting indigenous settlement, and I'm really talking about North America here. Basically, I mean, depending on, I'm not an expert in this, okay? Maybe some other people are, but pretty much the glaciers receded about 10,000 years ago, beginning of the Holocene epoch. And as soon as that happened, we had people come from wherever they came from, which is a whole other discussion, but you know, the native peoples of America, across the Bering Strait, whatever, they started coming in, and do you think that they had this, and we know this, do you think they came in and did nothing with fire management? The Native Americans people?
They did do something.
They used it to their benefit.
Yes, they used fire as a tool. As soon as they got here, probably the first day they crossed the Bering Strait, they had a campfire that they walked away from, and then it lit, and then it, you know, went for 1,000 acres. You know what I mean? I mean, just think of it like that. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just the way it was. You know, and you take that all the way through the late 1400s when you started to have European contact. And I think it's interesting, you know, reading, again, this goes back to the history, but I like hearing stories like in the Lewis and Clark journals when they were talking about the Oregon tribes that they ran into. Those, they get, you know, they'd have campfires, and what do you do around a campfire? You take a torch and you go light a tree on fire. There's stories about that where, you know, they would just go take a stick out and go light a tree up just to watch it torch. Because that's what we like to do when we drip torch, right? We like to watch a torch. Well, shit, they did the same thing back then. I mean, they were doing it for tools, they were doing it for entertainment and defensive and all those things that we've heard of in the classes. The point only is that, you know, fire and human use of fire in North America has been there since the glaciers receded. Then you had European settlement from the late 1400s through the late 1800s. I don't know if you guys know much about how America was founded, but it was basically founded from the west and the east inward. The western United States was the Spanish influence. They came into California and Arizona and New Mexico, which is completely different than the East Coast, which was the Western European countries, you know, Britain, Ireland, those sort of countries, primarily Britain and the Dutch. You know, so they were out on the East Coast, but there was a lot of influence with the Spanish settlers, and much earlier, you know, in the late 1400s, where they came in with the missions, and you know, there's all the socio-political things associated with it. But in terms of the vegetation changes, there's some really interesting papers and books. In fact, there's a book in there that I read called California's Native Wildflowers, and it talks about what they did is they took some of the bricks from the missions, like the old missions. They took the bricks, like in modern times, they dissolved the bricks, and they found the seeds that were in there, and they germinated the seeds, or they identified the seeds, just to see what was growing around there. And even at that time, they had things like black mustard and wild oats and the one that's real prostrate growing. Anyway, the cows like to eat it. Anyway, so the point is that some of these non-native species and stuff, they've been around literally since the 1400s because they came over from Europe.